Let me start by saying what someone else in this room has said. We're not there yet. It's very encouraging. A major step, I would say even a historic step, was taken in December, solving one of the most difficult parts of the negotiations in a difficult, complicated, but I think very constructive and encouraging way. But we're not still there. That's why I underline, as I did introducing our debate, that our support is not focusing only on the follow-up of the agreement and the implementation, but also in these coming weeks and months in trying to accompany the negotiations, try to support them, try also to support the strong leadership and vision of President Santos, that is for sure taking bold and impressive steps in this direction, and also supporting the country, all of it, in this process. The territories, I share very much the reference to the fact that we need to make sure that our support goes all the way down, to me it's somehow up, to where people live. When it comes to civil society and human rights defenders, I mentioned this in my introductory remarks specifically, this is a role for the European Union, we know that very well. And also encouraging and supporting the country as a whole and its people as a whole. I believe, for instance, that what we have done on the visa waiver was particularly important because it showed not only the support that the European Union was giving to the process and the intention to support the implementation of the process, but also that this is part of a bigger picture, which is the excellent relation, bilateral relation that the European Union has with Colombia, and also that this is framed into an even bigger picture, which is the strategic relations between the European Union and Latin America, and in particular with some countries in Latin America with which our relations are developing in an extremely positive way, especially in this last year. I have to say, President Santos and I met, I think, in this last year and a couple of months, probably 4 or 5 times, last time in December in Brussels, where we were signing together, well, actually witnessing together the signing of the visa waiver. But we had been meeting regularly before, I would say every couple of months. We were having a meeting every time that we were crossing each other around the world, being it at the margins of the Cumbre de las Americas or in the General Assembly, to pass the message to him, well, first of all, to listen from him what we could do to better support the process, even the decision to appoint a special envoy and to identify him or her, in this case it's him, in Imol Gilmer was coming out of a conversation with President Santos that believed this would have been a positive sign and a positive experience of negotiating the process, given the experience that Gilmer has on the Northern Ireland process, and on working on the follow-up, which might be even more difficult than the process of agreeing the agreement itself. Let me also say that this is, I believe, and some of you mentioned that, an example of what the European Union role can be in the world. It is, first of all, a sign that our engagement is precious, also in places that we might perceive as far away from us. Our focus in these dramatic times is obviously on our neighbourhood, in our region, south, east, I would say also north and west, because it might be strange heard from an Italian, but I believe that our work on the Arctic has to be substantial and consistent, because it's probably the new frontier of many things. But for sure, we have a priority in making sure that our region becomes a little bit more safer and stable than it is now, but our added value is incredibly high, also in places around the world, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. Not necessarily everywhere, but in specific places where history or politics, sometimes economy, sometimes people-to-people exchanges, culture, make so that the links, the ties, make our position, our contribution somehow special and valuable for institutions or people. And this is one of those cases. The global role of the European Union is this, and this is our strength. This is the strength of our contribution to somehow peace in the world. I know these are words that sometimes we feel a little bit naive when we say so, but at the end of the day, this is our interest, promoting and trying to facilitate peace in the world. But this is also the role of the European Union, investing in some models of trying to find a way out of conflicts. Some of you said it's much more difficult to put an end to a conflict than to start a conflict. I couldn't agree more. That's why it's much more convenient for us to invest in conflict prevention than trying to find a way out of a conflict that has already exploded. But there is a way, I would say a European way, in facilitating dialogue, facilitating cooperation, finding mediation, also encouraging compromise, also because this comes from our history. Will come in the following debate on the situation in Syria and the following debate, tensions in the Middle East. At the end of the day, it's always the same story. The European history is a history of conflicts, centuries of conflicts, that we have been spreading around in the world somehow and dragging others in our own conflicts, in wars, that finally managed to finish in the moment when we discovered that regional cooperation and reconciliation within Europe was the way out. And that brought us peace and stability and prosperity, even if sometimes we tend to forget this today. So it's a European way that can bring hope and somehow good stories around the world. And it's also the role of the European Union, investing in good stories, making them possible, and once they do happen, making them sustainable, making them last, making them work, which is not something that we can ever give for granted. Let me finish by saying that I really appreciate the unity you are showing in this, in the debate, in the vote you're going to take. And let me say that I'm completely sure that our friends in Colombia are going to notice this and appreciate this. These are exactly the kind of signs that also bring an added value to a difficult process in terms of encouragement and political support, which is precious in these difficult times. And let me conclude. Some of you mentioned Pope Francis. Let me conclude with quoting him on something that is also somehow a European way of seeing things. Pope Francis said, "The night of violence can turn into a day with no sunset, a day of concord, justice, so that there can be lasting peace. Please, we cannot afford another failure on the path to peace and reconciliation." This is the spirit, I think, with which we engage, we continue to engage with our Colombian friends, knowing that the way ahead is still difficult and we should not give it for granted, but knowing that, yes, it is possible, and I'm also convinced that 2016 can be the year where this conflict is finally finding an end and Colombia can find its peace. Thank you.
Grazie Vicepresidente Mogherini, lei resterà con noi anche per il prossimo dibattito. Comunico di aver ricevuto 7 proposte di risoluzione a conclusione di questa discussione. Adesso la discussione è chiusa, la votazione si svolgerà domani, mercoledì 20 gennaio alle ore 12:30.